Hare Krishna. I am, thank you. Thank you, Rikki. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Prabhupada Tirobhav Mahotsava ki jai. Go Premanandi Hari Bol. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinam. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharini Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatadi Satarni. Om Adhyanatimidandasya Jananjana Salakaya Chaksu Umilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Was born in the darkness of ignorance. And Srila Prabhupada very kindly forced open my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. Totally indebted to him for that, for this, and for all the opportunities that he's given to me and everybody in the whole world, in the universe, and beg for service at his lotus feet life after life. So thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak, especially to Malini. I know it comes from her, Hare Krishna. It's not an easy day to speak on Srila Prabhupada. I'll get my Kleenex ready. It's not an easy day. Although Srila Prabhupada has told us many times, he's told us that the appearance day and the disappearance day are of equal joy for the devotees. We get to see how deep our realization of it is on times like this. Perhaps if it was Srila Rupa Goswami's disappearance day, we were speaking, because our connection with him isn't so close, it's somewhat in the distant past, we think, oh, okay, yeah, it's a wonderful festival day. But for having had the incredible opportunity to have Srila Prabhupada's personal association, even though at a distance, that's for sure, but still he was there, he was in our lives. 44 years ago was Prabhupada's disappearance day. Amazing how that time goes, amazing. And I was thinking too, 44 years ago, Srila Prabhupada left. My experience with Srila Prabhupada was just 5 years of my life. From 72 to 77, just 5 years. And such an impression and such a change in the direction of my eternal sojourn. That's how Prabhupada affected me and how he's affected all of us in all of the people yet to come too. It's ever increasing, ever expanding, ever potent. Srila Prabhupada's connection, because of his connection with the Parampara, because of his connection with Sri Krishna, because of his connection and love for Krishna, then the Lord empowers him, just like he empowers in the disciplic succession, to inject Krishna within the heart of the devotees. That's the quality of those, the Uttama Adhikaris. They can inject the love for Krishna. They have that potency to inject it within the heart of those who hear their words, read their books, associate with him in those ways, remember him. So it's still very hard to consider it a festival day, because it's so fresh in the mind still, even 44 years, so fresh in the mind. So it's so glorious and important was his association. And so devastating was that the loss, that feeling of loss of when he departed this planet physically. And it's hard to even say all of those things because you want to say so many other things simultaneously. Okay, Prabhupada never left. Yes, I understand. I can understand that on an intellectual platform. I can understand it on a on a little bit of a realized platform, because I do feel his presence and I do feel his guidance, and I'm sure all of you do too. That's why we're all here together in this sacred Sangha of Prabhupada Nugas. But I personally just see how thin, paper thin my realization is. You know, I can say the words, oh yes, the appearance day and the disappearance day are both glorious and they're both deserve to be celebrated, but it still pulls on the heart, you know. And Srila Prabhupada's, actually too, if you think about it, and if you, probably any one of Srila Prabhupada's direct disciples, if you ask them, where were you on Prabhupada's disappearance day, everybody, you know, it's many things that we forget in our life, little details, this or that, where was I in this year and what he did, but everyone can say where they were when Prabhupada left, when they heard the news that Prabhupada left the planet. I was in Puerto Rico at the time, in a little center there in Santurce. It was right on the edge of the beach, some place in Puerto Rico. And I just remember how impacting was that news. So how do we one way we celebrate or immerse ourselves in thoughts of Srila Prabhupada is to think of his experience, you know, what we understand of his experience. So Srila Prabhupada, well, here, let me phrase it this way. In 1972, there was a conversation with some of Prabhupada's disciples, and Prabhupada was started to say that every 11 years in his life, something auspicious happened. And he started by recounting how in 1922, that's when he first met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. In 1922, Prabhupada was about 26 years old at the time. Yeah, 26. And his friend Narendranath was repeatedly requesting Srila Prabhupada to come and meet this great saintly person, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. And Prabhupada, from his upbringing in his family, Gaur Mohan and Rajani Devi, they had invited all through Prabhupada's youth as growing up, sadhus to come to their house all the time. So Prabhupada saw many, many sadhus and appreciated some greatly, and some he saw were not as genuine as deemed to be. So he was a little hesitant. When Narendra, his friend at the time, encouraged him to come and see Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, Prabhupada was a little hesitant because he had seen so many sadhus, in the so-called sadhus in the past. But Narendra kept on, he kept persisting and urging him. And Prabhupada said to the disciples now in 72, in the conversation in 72, he said, "You'll be glad to know that even in my youth, I was a leader." And he said, and that was particularly why Rajendranath wanted Srila Prabhupada to come and see Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, because he wanted to see if Srila Prabhupada approved of him, you know, and if Prabhupada approved of him, then all the others in their group would be more, take more advantage of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's association. So when Prabhupada heard that, it was kind of, okay, he was convinced to go to see him. So it was in Ultadanga, in Calcutta, on the rooftop. They had a little Gaudiya Math there. And at that time, when Prabhupada first met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj had a little, you know, whatever, preaching on the rooftop of that building. So Prabhupada and Rajendranath came in and offered their dandavats to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, kind of at a distance, not right in the center, they're in a distance. And no sooner than they were rising from offering their prayers and respects to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, that Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj immediately noticed Srila Prabhupada. And he said to him, on rising, said, "You look like educated gentlemen. Why don't you preach the message of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the English language in the West, you know, preach to the English speaking people?" And so just thinking on that first glance, Prabhupada got his instructions from the Spirit. He got his whole life mission. He, all right there in that first 5 minutes of seeing Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. It was so clear. It was so clear to Srila Prabhupada. Of course, he did offer a little bit of a resistance. He was thinking, how can we preach? How can we present, Indian philosophy if we're a dependent nation? Because Srila Prabhupada, as you're familiar, he was a follower of Gandhi at the time. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj very quickly and swiftly defeated any little glitter of an argument that Srila Prabhupada or opposition or that Srila Prabhupada had as to why it couldn't be done right now. Well, first, we need to get independence from the British rule. Then we can, present something to the world that's of value. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj said, more or less, he said, British rule will come and go. Someone else will come and go. Everything will come and go. And it's not very important. It's not very important. What's important is Lord Chaitanya's mission and his desire to spread the holy name all around the world. That's important. And that has priority. And Srila Prabhupada was immediately convinced. And he immediately accepted Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, as he explained many times, that he immediately accepted him as his spiritual master. And so that was in 1922. In 1933, that's when he took initiation. He didn't take initiation right away. He was just newly married. His family was just starting to grow, et cetera, et cetera. He didn't take initiation, but he accepted Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. He accepted his instructions right from the first day. It was there. That connection was there in the heart, unbreakable connection. And at the time, the situation in the Gaudiya Math, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj was preaching extensively, and there was a following, and those living in the temple were mostly the brahmacharis and the sannyasis, of course, at the time. So Srila Prabhupada, he was aloof from the day-to-day dealings of the Gaudiya Math. He was aloof from it. But he was favorable and helping out in so many ways, whenever he could and however he could. So when it was time, and there was a few incidences where one time in Vrindavan, when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj was conducting a parikrama of Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada was nearby on business, and he managed to come out for a day or two, and he connected up with the parikrama at Seshai Vishnu Temple. And right when he joined the party, they were making announcements. Well, we're going to have they're going to go to the temple to see the temple, or you have the choice of staying here because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj will speak. And so Prabhupada immediately thought, what am I going to see with my eyes if I go to the temple? What am I going to see with my eyes and realize? Nothing. Better let me hear from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. And Srila Prabhupada, he noted at the time, and admitted at the time, that he would listen to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj with rapt attention, but it was difficult to understand. Even for Srila Prabhupada, it was difficult for him to understand. So we can take a little side note from that for ourselves. Sometimes if you're not accustomed to hearing Srila Prabhupada's voice, or when you first start to hear his voice in his lectures, sometimes it's hard to understand him. But keep on, and just by becoming familiar with his voice and how he speaks, then it'll be like second nature. It'll just be like listening to your friends speak after a while, So keep with that, and make a note of that we should incorporate in our days, because how is it that we let's see how to say this. It's not the word, even the word disappearance, it has such a heavy connotation to it. And that's just what we don't want. We don't want Srila Prabhupada to disappear. So how are we going to keep him present? How are we going to keep him present? By keeping him present, by keeping ourselves present before him through his books, reading his books regularly, repeating what we've read in Srila Prabhupada's books to others, hearing about Srila Prabhupada and hearing his lectures. And, so many things. And even hearing the devotees' remembrances of Srila Prabhupada, it's so endearing to see all the different facets of how Srila Prabhupada related with his disciples and people in general in so many ways. It's just inspiring. So that's one way. That's one of the ways that we keep him present in our lives like that. And it's our duty, it's our duty, but it's our life. Duty is one thing. I don't like that word right now, but it's our life. It's our life, how to keep Prabhupada present. So in 1933, when it was time for initiation, the members of the Gaudiya Math, they knew who Srila Abhay Babu was. They knew Prabhupada, but he wasn't, like an active member of their community. So they weren't even sure that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj will initiate Prabhupada. And on hearing the request from one of the devotees that Abhay Charan Day wants to get initiated, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj immediately recognized that he knew him. He recognized that Prabhupada had made an impression on him. Said, "Oh yes, I will initiate him, because I have noted that he likes to hear," because of that quality. So sometimes one thing that I've experienced over the years on Srila Prabhupada's appearance day or disappearance day, somehow or other the center is Srila Prabhupada, but somehow or other I always think of myself in relation to Srila Prabhupada. What have I done? How have I pleased? Have I done anything? So it's awful. It's also a day of introspection too, because you think of, and that's one of the challenges for the disciples and the followers, how to repay that debt that we have to Srila Prabhupada. And yes, it's impossible to repay, but we don't leave it there. We don't say, yeah, it's impossible to repay, therefore, let me go on, with my life. But we have to continually try to see how can we repay that debt to Srila Prabhupada. And the reason that I got onto that subject is because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, he noted Srila Prabhupada and he said, "I've noted him because he likes to hear." And that very act alone pleased Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. What to speak of all the other activities that followed from that liking to hear and taking into his heart and dedicating his whole life existence to the mission of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. But now, in relation to ourselves, this is one simple way. What can we do? We can develop simple little things like that to please Srila Prabhupada, liking to hear of Srila Prabhupada, liking to hear from his books, liking to hear and repeat to others things that we've heard in Srila Prabhupada's books, and in a simple way. Yes, there's probably many of you out there that are going to do tremendous amounts of service to Srila Prabhupada and the disciplic succession. And there are probably many of us who don't have any hope for doing anything significant or apparently significant, but everything that we do is significant. And that's my point that I'm struggling to get out, that it might appear significant and it might, distribute 10,000 books or whatever, and bring, so many people to Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet. That's well and good. And if you have that capacity and capability, then it's wonderful and glorious. And then there are some of us who are simpler or not as qualified or whatever, but still not without the opportunity to please Srila Prabhupada in some simple, sincere rendering of service. That's the point. We all have that opportunity. And we can tax our brain how to do that. Some devotees I just heard of a devotee who's in this room right now, wanting to get some prasadam bars so that when driving into town and you see homeless people begging on the side of the street, you can distribute prasadam to them. So simple ways like that. We can all do something like that to, to give everyone the opportunity or an opportunity to hear about Krishna and Srila Prabhupada's glories. Anyway, so in 1933, back to the storyline here, sorry. So 22 is when Srila Prabhupada met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj for the first time. 33 is when he took initiation. And then in 1944, so it had been some time, Srila Prabhupada was growing his business and growing his family also at the same time, and and participating in Gaudiya Math activities as much as he could and facilitating them as much as he could. In 1944, because why? Because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj told him that very first instruction, and his very first instruction was preach in English, so Srila Prabhupada started back to Godhead in 1944. He started back to Godhead in 1944. And that was no small task, I mean, he wrote all the articles. He had to get a hold of the printer. He had to get the paper. He had to check the galleys as they came off, and et cetera, and all the different aspects of it, and fund it personally. He didn't have, outside funding. He didn't have a sponsor. And then getting all the BTGs, and then what? He had to personally distribute them. And that's what, from the funds of distributing the BTGs, is what paid for the printing of the BTGs. And all of that, and he wasn't living. I can't remember this exactly, but I'm thinking that he wasn't really living in Delhi at the time, but he had to go back and forth to Delhi. But that's a little fuzzy, so don't quote me on that. But anyway, so he had to do that. This was all, and why was that? Because of his firm conviction and faith in the instructions of Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. That was the beginning of how he started to manifest Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj's instruction to him. And he had a hard time. It was not an easy thing. Srila Prabhupada's endeavors were not easy. There was one in that book, if you're familiar with it, it's a really nice book on remembrances of Prabhupada. It was gathered up by Mula Prakriti. It's called Prabhupada, a Friend to All. She took interviews of people who knew Srila Prabhupada before he came to the West. Mm-hmm. So from India and from Vrindavan, from Radha Damodar days, and it's even also from his days in Allahabad and so many places. She managed to get many interviews. Now, so there was one remembrance, and I don't remember the person's name, but one person that Srila Prabhupada would come to regularly. Every time there was a new edition of the BTG, Srila Prabhupada had a bicycle, and he would go to the tea stalls on his little bicycle. It was a broken bicycle, but it functioned. And he would distribute the BTGs at the tea stall to the people and to some of the vendors, et cetera, et cetera. So this one man who would get BTGs regularly from Srila Prabhupada said that Prabhupada's bicycle had a particular sound to it because the chain rubbed against the guardrail. So it made a chicka-choom, chicka-choom, chicka-choom kind of noise. It made a distinctive noise. So every time this man would hear chicka-choom, chicka-choom, oh, he knew that Abai Babu was coming to give him another BTG, And so, and it, like I said, you can imagine it was, he's the only distributor. It's tea stalls. He's working also to support his family. So whatever, as time allotted, he would distribute those BTGs. And the printer would say, Abai Babu, how long can I go on printing if there's no payment and if you're not keeping up with your payments? And Prabhupada would then have to convince the man, no, all of this will come. It'll all come. Just be patient. Let's keep going. It'll all come. I'll pay you on, and he would assure the printer to keep printing. And then gradually he would pay him in due course. So back in this, so BTG was started in the 44 and it's been going on ever since, although not at the same level, but still. So in the beginning of our movement in the 70s, BTG was practically our only book that it was definitely the first one that we had to distribute. And I remember hearing Niranjana Maharaj saying that when they would get the BTGs, they would they would take the box and they would go to distribute the BTGs, but they didn't even have the money. The temple didn't give them the money to get on the bus. They had to first distribute a few BTGs to get the money to get on the bus, to go to a certain or better spot to distribute the BTGs. And they would distribute 10 or 20 or whatever for a quarter, and then come back and, and they would, remark or think or note how it was, austere, it was hard. But then they would remember how Srila Prabhupada had to go into Delhi and print and this and that, and they had a broken bicycle, and that would give them, encouragement and enlivening them to keep on doing it. So that was 1944. And then, so 11 years later in 55, now it had been some time. So in 22, Srila Prabhupada met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj and impressed him on the preaching mission of Lord Chaitanya. And all that time he was meditating. He accepted the order and he was meditating. How am I going to execute it? How? And it's not that everything came to him all at once. Do it like this or this. You just, like Krishna often does. He gives you a little inspiration and you work on it. Then you have to tweak it. Then you work on it and then you tweak it. And then he says, you get inspiration to do something else. So by 55 now, Srila Prabhupada was seriously contemplating how he was going to fulfill Lord Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj's mission and instructions. And his business, by the Lord's arrangement, was declining, coming into different difficulties. I'll skip those difficulties. And even in his family life, his wife was not supportive of his preaching endeavors. She was a wonderful mother, she was a wonderful wife, this and that, and that's where she was at. She wasn't into a world preaching endeavor or even a local preaching endeavor, you could say. So that was also on his mind. So in 1955, that's when Srila Prabhupada, I don't know if it's when it started, but he definitely had a dream then of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. He had a few dreams of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj coming to him in a dream and saying to take sannyas. And when Prabhupada would tell his disciples about that story, he said, at first I was repulsed. Oh, sannyas. Oh, it's so difficult. I know how there's the family, this, that. So how do you, anyway, but in 1955, one evening in 1955, at 1 o'clock in the morning, Srila Prabhupada, or a little bit before that, he had a dream of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj telling him to take sannyas. And he immediately woke up from that dream. And it's impressed him so much that he left the house then and went to the Gaudiya Math temple, which was nearby. Sridhar Maharaj was in charge there, B.R. Sridhar Maharaj. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, he's knocking at the door. It's all closed, everyone's asleep. And so they come down and say, and so Prabhupada's, excited or whatever, animated. And he's saying, and he says to Sridhar Maharaj, said, I just had a dream. Guru Maharaj has asked me to take sannyas. Please, can you give me sannyas? Right then, after that dream, he wanted to take sannyas right then. Now, Sridhar Maharaj he was in charge of that mat, and he was friendly with the Days, Srila Prabhupada's family, and he also knew Prabhupada's wife's family. her maternal family. So he was friendly with both families. And he was thinking, if I give him sannyas, they're all good. It's going to be a little difficult for me. And, it's quite sudden and this and that. So Srila Maharaj tries to pacify Srila Prabhupada. He says, well, this is all well and good, but perhaps you should first take some time to internally prepare for sannyas. And in the meantime, explain it to your families, because Prabhupada had never said anything to his family about that at all. Explain it and bring them on board. And then in due course of time, we can talk about sannyas. So Srila Prabhupada was understandably disappointed, but somehow or other, whatever, that incident passed. And then some time passed. And then there was another dream. Another dream, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj came. So another time in the middle of the night, the door said, Maharaj, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj has come again. And Sridhar Maharaj again tries, well, there are different stages of sannyas. Maybe first you should do the Bahudak stage where you live outside the village and your family comes and feeds you, until you get accustomed to sannyas life. And Srila Prabhupada responded, no, the order has been given. Mm-hmm. It has come from above. I have no decision in the matter. It must be done. Wow. Such determination. And still, Sridhar Maharaj was reluctant. So again, understandably, Srila Prabhupada was disappointed, but not discouraged and put it under the rug and forgot about it. No, it was there, it was burning. How is this going to happen? How am I going to do this? So at a certain point, and he also asked other god brothers in other mutts, if they would, sannyasi god brothers, Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, and I don't know what else, but not getting any favorable response or encouragement from them. Mm-hmm. Finally, Srila Prabhupada speaks with Bhakti Pragya Keshava Maharaj, who's in Mathura, right in Mathura. And he explains to him his dreams, and he explains to him the instructions of Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj, and Keshava Maharaj got it right off the bat. He said, yes, you must take sannyas. And Prabhupada was so relieved, But I still, now this is the thing, I've also heard from an interview, Vrindavan Day, that Prabhupada's son, his oldest son, how shocked the family was mm-hmm. when Prabhupada took sannyas, because they hadn't, apparently Prabhupada hadn't spoken to them about it. So how it's explained here, and this is all from that interview, I believe, from Mula Prakriti and these different devotees that she had interviewed. So when Keshava Maharaj agreed that Prabhupada should take sannyas and that he was willing to do the initiation ceremony, then I hope I have, what I think, okay, what I was going to say is, I think I have my time frame wrong. Actually, after the talk to Sridhar Maharaj, the second one, when it said the order has been given. Okay, sorry. So the order has been given. I have no choice in the matter. Then I must follow through. So Sridhar Maharaj again denied that request at that moment in the nighttime. But then the next day, there was kind of a commotion going on in the Mat. And that's when Prabhupada had left his home. That's what, right then, Prabhupada left home. He didn't take any clothes, didn't take any money, didn't take any documents. And he didn't apparently speak to his family about it at all. He just left. And he was there in the Mat, and he would stay and for 3 days, just chanting. He just chanted 3 days straight to, assess, figure out. So from that time he had left home, and then later on, sometime later, Keshava Maharaj agreed to give him sannyas. So that in sannyas initiation was arranged quite quickly. And there wasn't invitations sent out. It wasn't a big festival, nothing. It was just, okay, we're going to do it. And maybe in a day or two, I don't know the time frame, but very quickly they arranged. So Prabhupada was given sannyas, and also this other elderly brahmachari, Sanatan. Sanatan became Muni Maharaj, and Abhay Babu became A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, and Keshava Bhakti Pragya Keshava Maharaj gave the initiation, and Narayan Maharaj, he was the one who was performing the fire yajna, and so there was just a few people there at that ceremony. There was just a few people, and Bhakti Pragya Keshava Maharaj spoke a little bit in English. He spoke a little bit, and then he turned to Srila Prabhupada and he said, "Now you speak." So then Srila Prabhupada spoke in English to confirm that this is the order of my spiritual master. So at that time, even, let's just say there were 10 people there. I don't know how many people, but there were very few who spoke English, maybe 3. Narayan Maharaj, Bhakti Keshava Maharaj, and Srila Prabhupada were probably the only ones that spoke English, but still Srila Prabhupada spoke English. Why? Because he was determined. That was his, sign of determination of following Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj's order. So that ceremony was 1958. 55 is when he left home for the first, that incident when he left home, and then he was preparing. That initiation, the formal sannyas initiation was 58. So 22 was initiation, 22 was a meeting Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta. 33 was initiation. 44 was back to Godhead. And 55 was leaving home. Then so 66, Srila Prabhupada explained, that was when ISKCON was incorporated. Now he had come to America in 65 and started, his determined effort to follow the order of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, and not attached to success or failure. That's how he could do it. He was just determined to try to execute the order of the spiritual master, and not attached to success or failure. So after, a relatively slow start, a year, by 66, they were established in 22 2nd Avenue, and they had that Matchless Gift storefront. And still there was just a very small handful of committed followers, few, but there were people gathering, people interested. And Srila Prabhupada had made contact with a lawyer, and I don't know if he had made that contact initially for immigration purposes, for Prabhupada's green card purposes, or what. But anyway, he had made some acquaintance with a young lawyer who was very favorable to Prabhupada and favorable to the movement and to what Prabhupada was. So Prabhupada had him draw up the articles of incorporation. So he was there, that man, his name was Alan something or other, forget. And he was there. And so Prabhupada at the end of a lecture said, and so we have these articles of incorporation. We're going to form an international society. And there they were looking at each other, and on, a few hippies and whatever. And there was, a handful of followers, and probably talking about an international society. And they're like, not, fuzzy brained, no conception of what it meant or what Prabhupada's vision was. And he just randomly pulled people out of the crowd to sign, to be the signers on that. Some of them were committed followers, and some of them were just people who just happened to show up that night. And they got to be signers or whatever, the charter members or whatever. But anyway, it's just interesting.
Yes.
So that was 66. So now back to this conversation in 72 that was taking place when Srila Prabhupada was saying to his disciples that every 11 years something auspicious happens in my life. So at that time, it was 72. So probably I'm not 100% familiar which books were published by then. Probably the beginning of the Bhagavatam was published here in the States now. probably not very much more than that, first or second canto. So then the devotee said, now this is in 72. So, that means, Prabhupada, in 77, that means you'll probably finish the Bhagavatam. That's how we could understand. They'll probably finish the Bhagavatam then. And Prabhupada answered, perhaps. Perhaps that'll be what'll be the significant of 77. So when the Prabhupada's Leela played out to 1977 and his health was declining and there's so many circumstances were there, he was in Rishikesh. He went to Rishikesh for a while because the devotees were thinking that the cooler climate and drinking of the Ganges would help restore his health. His health was declining seriously. And so they went to Rishikesh for a few days. And they were there. And then there was a storm. And somehow or other, although it's not particularly, it's documented that there was a storm one night while they were at Rishikesh, but it's not really particularly documented Srila Prabhupada's response, but things changed, got more serious because Prabhupada at the next day after the storm and the night when the electricity went off and et cetera, Srila Prabhupada said, perhaps I'm going to leave my body soon and I want to go to Vrindavan. So they drove from Rishikesh to Vrindavan. And still there in Vrindavan in those last days, in his, I believe at that time, Srila Prabhupada then completely stopped eating and drinking, completely. Just a little, the little times that he would drink a little sip or eat a little something or other was totally insignificant, for the time of that passed where he wasn't eating or drinking anything. So but still there's the recordings of Srila Prabhupada's frail voice dictating the translations to the 10th canto Bhagavatam, 13th chapter, Krishna and the cows, stealing the cows and the cowherd boys, Brahma Vimohan Leela. And Srila Prabhupada, and when you read those purports, even if you're unaware, if you're reading them unaware, this is the last thing, the last few things that Prabhupada has translated, the last few days before he leaves his body. You're not aware of it by reading. You know what I mean? In that sense, you have to be aware of it by other type of, knowing Prabhupada's life and everything. In other words, they're clear, pure, realized, enlivening purports, not as if there's anything, a spark of any turmoil in anyone's life. Amazing. And Srila Prabhupada's there, So that I just wanted to share a little bit of that. Sometimes it's easy to, let's say, it's good. It's good for us to become aware of Srila Prabhupada's life and the struggles he went through and, his victories and so many things, so I just wanted to bring a little bit of, his biography, you could say, how events in his life that we should become aware of. And this is also another way that we as individuals, we're not going to let Srila Prabhupada disappear from our life. The more that we know about him, the less chance that he'll disappear, because those impressions, they go so deep. Those impressions go so deep. And that's what we're all aspiring for. We're all aspiring for the day that we can continue our service in his presence. And it will come. It'll come for all of us if we cultivate that remembrance. So just another aspect of Srila Prabhupada. Sometimes in my reading, I come across different verses that great devotees are saying, usually to the Supreme Lord. And I think, oh, that's so beautiful. It's said so nicely. I wish I could say that to Srila Prabhupada. So hold on a second. There's a particular series of verses in the 6th canto, in the Bhagavatam, in the 6th canto, in the story of Vritrasura. Vritrasura, who was Chitraketu in his previous life, and then for some quirk, got cursed by Parvati. I'm just skipping, I'm giving a very brief synopsis of that story. Got cursed by Parvati to take, because of what she perceived as an insult to her husband. Parvati cursed Chitraketu to take birth in a demoniac life, demoniac species. Takes birth as Vritrasura, who's this huge, gigantic, his body literally, physically, is huge, gigantic. Even just by his steps, he can crush millions of soldiers just by his footprint, getting squished on them. So there's a whole series of events leading up to Indra's fight with Vritrasura, and cutting to the part that I want to talk about is the 11th chapter of this 6th canto of the Bhagavatam, where Vritrasura is encouraging Indra to please kill him. Please, you've got the Narayan Astra, you've got the thunderbolt that's charged with the Shakti of Narayan. Please just kill me quickly, and etc. And so, okay. So anyway, Vritrasura offers these prayers. And when I read these prayers years ago, but as soon as I read them, I thought, these are the prayers that I'd like to offer to Srila Prabhupada. So I'll try to do that here. So this is 11th chapter, verse 24. Aham harer tava padaikamula dasanu daso bhavitasmi bhuya. Manasmarateshu punergunams te grinita vakarma karotukaya. Oh my Lord. And I'm offering these to Prabhupada. But he says, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, will I again be able to be a servant of your eternal servants who find shelter only at your lotus feet? O Lord, in my life, may I again become their servant, so that my mind may always think of your transcendental attributes, my words always glorify those attributes, in my body always engage in loving service to your Lordship. 25. Na nata priksham na parma na chaparamestyam na sarvabhaumam na rasadipatyam na yoga siddhir aptunar bhavamba samangyasa tadvir harhaya kangshe. Oh my Lord, O source of all opportunities, I do not desire to enjoy in Dhruvaloka, the heavenly planets, or the planets where Lord Brahma resides, nor do I want to be the supreme ruler of the earthly planets or lower planetary systems. I do not desire to be master of the powers of mystic yoga, nor do I want liberation if I have to give up your lotus feet. Yeah. 26. Ajata paksham eva mataram kaga stanyam yata vatsaratam shudarta priyam priyega vyushitam vishana manoravindaksha dridikshate tvam. O lotus-eyed Lord, as baby birds that have not yet developed their wings always look for their mother to return and feed them. As small calves tied with ropes await anxiously at the time of milking, for the time of milking, when they will again be allowed to drink the milk of their mothers, or as a morose wife whose husband is away from home always longs for him to return and satisfy her in all respects, I always yearn for the opportunity to render direct service unto you. And one more. Mamotama sloka janesu sakyam samsara chakre brahmatasva karma bhi. Tvanmaya yatmaja sare graheshu didriksha chittas ashakta chittasya nanata bhuya. Oh my Lord, my Master, I'm wandering throughout this material world as a result of my fruitive activities. Therefore, I simply seek friendship in the association of your pious and enlightened devotees. My attachment to my body, to wife, children, and home is continuing by the spell of your external energy, but I wish to be attached to them no longer. Let my mind, my consciousness, and everything I have be attached only to you. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So I was hoping that perhaps some of you would like to offer some prayers or glorifications or something of Srila Prabhupada today, not just for one or two people, but for anyone. Gajendra, are you ready to do that?
Well, yes, I'm just wanting to comment this how hearing from you about this morning, it's how emotional it is for me. And I appreciated that you were talking very near the beginning about, how the appearance or disappearance, both of these things are, in a sense, equally important and relishable. In one sense, they're very sort of a different mood, but it's kind of like that for devotees, whether happiness or distress or birth or death. So I was appreciating that, but I wanted to. You're also talking about that time, what was happening, and I just wanted to comment or just say what it was like for me. I joined in '77. I moved into the temple just some months before Prabhupada disappeared, and it was a really interesting time. At that time, as part of the morning program, we would always, when we offered our final obeisances, there was this prayer every single day. We said, "Our dear Lord Krishna, if you so desire, please save Srila Prabhupada, just to remain with us." And I just remember that day. We just knew something was up. Amarendra called us into the temple room. And this never happened in the middle of the day, all the devotees to be called. And by the way, as many people know now, after the day he signed the contract to buy Nuram and Reti.
Yeah, thanks.
But we could just feel the energy. And we really didn't know what he was going to say, or at least I didn't, and nobody else was saying. And he just started crying, and he told us Prabhupada had left. And I don't know how to explain really what it's like, but if you've ever lost a loved one, or even a dog, or that's the intense emotion that's associated, or maybe at a funeral, there's a couple, but you had a temple room of dozens and dozens of devotees just erupt in a tidal wave of transcendental grief. It was one of the most hard to believe, painful, but most deep spiritual, relishable moments that could ever be experienced. It was, we felt so connected to Prabhupada and so utterly lost in that moment at the same time. It's one of the heaviest experiences. And I can always, remember that day, but in listening to you, I'm really reliving it emotionally. And I just wanted to, it's just, I don't know, I just had to say something about it. It was really extraordinary.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. It's and you phrased it so nicely in the sense of it was so intense, and at the same time, it was so in that relishable, it's ecstasy. I mean, what can you say?
Yeah.
It's inexplicable. But then, and that's also, then you think of how, Radharani's feeling of separation from Krishna, how do you explain that? And how do you explain to somebody who just tunes into that part of the Leela, how that's actually ecstatic? Well, this is our glimpse into how something like that can be simultaneously devastating and and just like I mentioned, anyone who was around when Srila Prabhupada left, anyone you ask them, they can tell you exactly where they were and exactly what happened, and when they first found out that Prabhupada left. And if you're tuned into the events that were taking place in Vrindavan up until the time Srila Prabhupada left, there was also that pulling of the emotion too with the devotees, because at a certain point, the devotees pleaded with Srila Prabhupada, please don't leave. We need you. And ultimately Srila Prabhupada's response, maybe not immediately, I don't remember exactly that, but anyway, ultimately Srila Prabhupada's response was, okay, Krishna has I'll stay, more or less. Prabhupada said that he would stay. So as if Krishna had given him the choice. You can either come now or you stay. So Prabhupada said, I'll stay. So then we immediately thought, he'll stay forever. Even anyway, Hare Krishna. There was a movie, remember Gajendra? Sometime in the 70s or 60s. What was the name of that movie? About when the atomic bomb went off in Oklahoma. Was it The Day the World Ended or something? Or The Day the World Stood Still? I think that was the name of it.
Okay.
That would be appropriate for the response of everybody when they heard that Srila Prabhupada, the day the world stood still. And
I really, really appreciate that, because it was a sense of being like the world was lost, like the world ended in a sense. That's really what it felt like.
definitely.
Prabhupada was everything to us. That was the mood at the temples at the time. We were just all that ideal of like Krishna and Prabhupada being in the center and harmony. That's what we were really living.
Yeah.
All the other stuff wasn't there yet. Yeah.
Wasn't there, right?
In our world. Yeah.
So, and I would like also not just to emphasize that in the sense of, so all of us who have come after that, perhaps there's a little feeling of I've missed out. Okay, so no denying there's there's validity to that. But in the other sense, in the spiritual sense, we haven't missed out. None of us have missed out. We have that opportunity to connect with Srila Prabhupada, and you've done it. You've all done it to such a degree. Look at this nice sangha of devotees that you've had because you've connected to Srila Prabhupada. So don't think your inspiration, don't think that you're, especially when you get inspiration and you feel like it's coming from Srila Prabhupada, it is. He's coming, he's reaching through, he's beyond the limits of time and space and, whatever, and he's there. And how, this is, take the opportunity to share with others even if you consider them insignificant, they're not insignificant realizations or feelings of Prabhupada's presence, that's so inspiring. Don't, the old folks, we have our experience and so many things that we relish. One time somebody described our remembrances of Srila Prabhupada are like in a little jewel box, in a little jewelry box, and you take open, you pull out your little jewels. Most of us didn't have that much experience, direct contact with Srila Prabhupada. And even if you think of Srila Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, they didn't have tremendous like Prabhupada saw Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj 3 or 4 times, I believe it's recorded, just a few times, but everything was so impactful. But okay, so now, for you and your Sangha of devotees, don't be shy. Don't be shy to express your love for Srila Prabhupada, or how he might have appeared to you in a dream or inspired you in this way. Please do, because that keeps it ever fresh for all of us. And you'll see, and you'll also see that person who reminds you of something, who had a dream of this or whatever, an inspiration or a motive to try to just do something simple. There was one devotee, sorry, this just came to me. There was one devotee when my husband and I first moved to Alachua here. I think it was like 85, 86 or something, maybe 88. But anyway, early 80s. And we came under one impression and found out, oh, it's not like that. So we moved further south, and we were in Naples for a while. And there was just 5 families in the area. And somehow or other, my husband got in touch with this person, a devotee, Prabhupada's disciple, got in touch with with Dravanaksha, and he was just saying, and he lived in Buffalo, New York, this person, I don't remember his name, I'm sorry, but his service, he got an inspiration to develop the woods in the back of his house for a Prabhupada garden. And that was his service, and that was his connection. And that's all, it was simple and it was glorious, and it was connecting in that way for him. So we might have different things, how we connect to Srila Prabhupada, but it's so nice to hear and share. Just like there's so many stories of people, which right now I can't remember any of them, but I remember one person, when he was handed a book, one of Prabhupada's books, on a devotee on Sankirtan handed him a book. He said, "That's the man." And the devotee said, "That's the man. He came to me in a dream." So many things like that. So Srila Prabhupada is here in our lives, and we want him to be even more ever present in our lives. And whatever little service that we can do for Srila Prabhupada, okay, yes, it's little, but it's not insignificant. It's not insignificant. Anyway. Anyone else? Would you like to say something, Mom?
I'm really appreciating hearing everything you shared. I was fascinated by everything. So I thank you for coming here, and thank you for sharing yourself in that way. And I was thinking, Srila Prabhupada, he come in different form, because, as a child, I received spiritual sky, little bottle of sandalwood. Well, that was Prabhupada.
Yes.
That was Prabhupada. That's, there's Krishna's energy, but it's Prabhupada. And in 77, I received a book.
I like that.
I received a book, but I just received a book. I didn't do anything with it. It was 77.
Yeah.
And so, in a sense, my experience of Srila Prabhupada, when I finally surrender, he knocked on my door so many times, but when I finally surrendered, was in Montreal. And in Montreal, there is a murti of Srila Prabhupada. And I never had a sense that murti wasn't fully present and alive and connected with me.
Yes.
From the very, very start. From the very, very start. In fact, constantly the people around me were trying to steer me in a different direction. But it was obvious to me that Srila Prabhupada was guiding me. Mm-hmm. And then part of his guidance, he sent me to Jadurani. Very, very early on, he sent me to Jadurani. And Jadurani was so frustrated with me because I couldn't speak English.
Ooh la la.
Very short temper, a little bit. So she was so frustrated with me because I couldn't speak English. And she said, "Go and ask Srila Prabhupada to teach you English."
Oh, what a wonderful instruction.
Exactly. And so I felt like, okay, I had a lot of admiration for Jadurani. She was my mentor, and she was everything for me at the time. And I went to Srila Prabhupada and I asked him, teach me English. And he did.
He said, read my books and you'll learn.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then I started to read the Bhagavad Gita. It took me a full year to read Bhagavad Gita. I had Bhagavad Gita, I would spend an hour and a half every day in Bhagavad Gita with dictionary.
Oh, yeah.
And I will read Bhagavad Gita with dictionary. And it was so slow. And little by little, the people in the temple said, you speak English like Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah.
And Prabhupada was teaching me English.
Yeah.
And there is no doubt about that.
Yeah, totally.
I will go on
So nice.
Sankirtan. I will go on Sankirtan at the GFK. One is Jadurani, which, at the time, she was a direct, giver of Srila Prabhupada. She was really focused on Srila Prabhupada at that time.
Uh-huh.
And I will go on Sankirtan and I will distribute Srila Prabhupada's books. And I felt my English was fluent. I could understand people, I could speak with them. They were leaving me with books. I will go back to the ashram where there was a lot of prajapa happening and blah, 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 negativity happening. I will go back to the ashram. I couldn't speak a word in English. Nobody could understand me. I was left alone because I couldn't understand. Just see, exactly.
Yeah.
Just see. And so when I'm thinking of the disappearance, because you made a comment about Rupa Goswami at the beginning,
Yeah.
and for me, from my perspective, with I didn't have I didn't even join the movement when Srila Prabhupada was on the planet, because I think a lot of people, even like Gajama was sharing, even if they never saw Prabhupada, because when Prabhupada was on the planet, all the devotees were impregnated with Srila Prabhupada, that they were in contact with Srila Prabhupada like that. So when I came, there was a completely different society and the ISKCON institution. Prabhupada wasn't that present anymore in that way. And it could have been. Nothing needed to change. It could have been that every devotee was carrying Srila Prabhupada, so much so that when you join the temple, people who joined the temple in 77 or before that, I never had a physical contact with Srila Prabhupada. They were with Srila Prabhupada because everybody was with Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah.
So by the time I came, it wasn't like that. And it could have been like that. But what I want to say is that from my perspective, we didn't have a direct contact with Srila Prabhupada, or didn't have a direct contact with Srila Prabhupada followers when I came to the temple, besides Jadurani. Jadurani was an exception in my world. And she's the one who really gave me Srila Prabhupada. I really, I'm forever indebted to her for that.
Yeah.
And so when I look at the appearance and disappearance, but the fact is that in both cases, the increased remembrance of Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah.
And remembrance of Srila Prabhupada is the goal of human life. So in that way, there is no difference between appearance and disappearance, because the increased remembrance of Srila Prabhupada and the remembrance of Srila Prabhupada is going to be bittersweet. It's going to be bittersweet on his appearance or disappearance. Because on his appearance also, it's like, oh, I want to be with him. I want to be, and we read all those offerings to Srila Prabhupada, is so moving. And on his disappearance, usually we hear pastime of Srila Prabhupada is so moving. But in both cases, it's a disappearance. And also the point you made about the pain. When Nautan Dastakor in his song, he said, I will smash my head.
I was going to mention that. I forgot, but it's true.
I want to smash my head against the rock.
Yes.
So it is that naturally. And when he sings that song, not all the people were physically present with him.
No, already, right.
And most of them, they were not. Most of them he never met. And he sings that song and he said, I will smash my, that's a big statement.
That's a big, yeah. I actually thank you for bringing that song up. Yeah, Needle Prema Dana. Sometimes somebody just says, oh, and today's the disappearance day of whomever, I'm going to sing Ye Anil Donna, Prema Donna, and already the tears come to the eyes, just the tune, just the remembrance. And and this is Srila Prabhupada's gift to all of us and Krishna's gift. And that's, yes, we're supposed to control our senses and control our mind and do this and do that, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, bhakti is the path of emotion. It's a path, but superlative emotion, pure emotion. And it pulls in both directions, the sweet and the bitter, the happiness, the union and the separation. It pulls in so many directions, and it's
Perfect.
relishly perfect. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else would like to offer any comments or realizations or remembrances or anything? You all have you have another program later too, right? Okay.
Hare Krishna.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Hari Bol Rukmini.
Hare Bol. So I joined the Hare Krishna in 1977 in London.
Wow.
And that was a couple weeks after Prabhupada has left England.
Oh, yeah, he'd gone to England. Yeah,
So and as soon as I joined, there was no real Bhakti program, so I pretty much straight joined the Sankirtan, the Lady Sankirtan party. And so I did service upstairs to help, all the ladies who already went out on the streets, and I was counting Lakshmi and assisting the Bajahari, the leader, the Sankirtan leader. And and just from him, I heard that Prabhupada he was just there, and I just missed him. And it was quite a thing that I felt like, I came too late, because I actually met the devotee. I saw the devotees on Harinam in Amsterdam when I was traveling on my way to England. And so I met the devotees just face to face, but I didn't actually go to meet them there, right? And I already had my ticket ferry to come to England. And while I saw the devotees, I was in a souvenir store smelling spiritual sky perfume.
Oh, just by chance. That was just by chance.
It's all by chance. And while I was smelling the spiritual sky, which I still have with me, this little bottle with Krishna on it.
Nice.
And then I hear the ching, 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 and I ran out to the street, to the walking street in Amsterdam to see what this is about, and I was like, wow, I was captured. I saw some brahmacharis, and even the black brahmachari was there. So interesting. So when I came to so anyway, I couldn't, I didn't know where to find devotees in Amsterdam just because I saw some people passing by. So on my way to England, I again, coincidentally or by providence, I met somebody who told me about the Krishna Lunch program in London. So, and I met him, there was just again, by higher arrangement. And then I went to Krishna Lunch and saw the, Rohini, Nanda and Bajari. And I, a few days after I left the youth hostel and moved in. And when I moved in, Prabhupada, he was like, this is it, my father, and I was so happy, during the Guru Puja at 6 a.m., whenever it was, it was so exciting to just be so alive with the devotees. And it was Kartik. And I also remember this prayer that we used to sing, my dear Lord Krishna, if you so desire, please cure Srila Prabhupada. And so that was really, and I do remember that when Prabhupada was still on the planet, and I remember some devotees like Sarvamangala, they came back from India, and this impression of her coming and crying that Prabhupada left, I never forget that impression. So that was yeah, so that was really part of how I felt, I was like part of, so it was like Prabhupada was taken away from the picture in some sense when everybody thought, okay, now it's time to establish someone else.
Yeah.
Locally by the zonal acharya system. But for me, Prabhupada never, it was always Prabhupada for me.
Yeah.
So that was.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And just, you just said something that triggered a memory that I wanted to speak about. And it's not my memory, it's Bhakti Lata's. And I actually should have called her to have her remind me of the details of it, but I didn't. So this might not be exactly what happened, but I'm going to give you. So when Bhakti Lata, she had a dream, and I guess it was after Srila Prabhupada had left or something. So she had a dream. Srila Prabhupada was sitting on the Vyasasan, and the curtains closed in her dream, and the curtains closed in front of Srila Prabhupada. And then she couldn't see him anymore. And she was devastated. But then she said from under the curtain came a little wire, like an earphone wire, like she still had a connection to Srila Prabhupada through his lectures, through his books, whatever. So his physical presence might be finished for now, or apparently, or whatever, but there's still our connection there. Anyway, something you said there just reminded me that. And I thought, oh yeah, thank you, Krishna. Because I had wanted to say that, because we, the world stood still on that day, but obviously it is keeping going. And we need to, all of us need to keep Prabhupada in our hearts, foremost on our consciousness in our life. And we need to think of ways that, how our different people's lives are different. Some people are professional, have this and that. Some people are in the house or whatever. Some people are retired, whatever. However it manifests, we need to think of ways, tax our brain, how we can increase our hearing of Srila Prabhupada, from Srila Prabhupada, of Srila Prabhupada. And when you start to do that, you might think, oh, my life is so busy, I have so many responsibilities, how can I do? But when you start to think of ways, again, just like Srila Prabhupada, it wasn't manifest to him right in the very beginning, the whole way he was going to spread Krishna consciousness, but by his continual meditation on how am I going to do it, and acting on some inspiration that he got, then gradually more and more opportunities. So in that similar way, if we meditate like that, how can I increase my opportunity to hear from Srila Prabhupada and about Srila Prabhupada, then gradually things will open up that you never would have considered before. And you think, oh, wow, yeah, it does fit in if I do it like this, if I, whatever. So just a thought to end with. So let's bring Srila Prabhupada to the forefront of our consciousness. Yeah. By glorifying him, by reading his books, by following his instructions to the best of our ability, and by telling others about him. And I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful Prabhupada remembrances. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Premanandi. Hari Bol. Thank you all. Bunch of couple of
Thank you, Mother Nanda. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.